Welcome to ObscuraTime. In the quiet town of Oloko, southeastern Nigeria, a spark was lit. A spark that would ignite the largest anti-colonial uprising in Nigeria's history. Led not by soldiers, not by kings, but by women. Thousands of them. This is the story of the Aba Women's War of 1929, a forgotten chapter of defiance, resilience, and revolutionary power. To understand the Aba Women's War, we need to go back to when Nigeria wasn't Nigeria, but a land of many ethnic nations, like the Igbo, the Yoruba, and the Hausa. In 1914, the British merged these regions into a single colony they called Nigeria. But it wasn't a union, it was controlled. Through a system called indirect rule, the British ruled through local leaders, chiefs and warrant officers, handpicked to do colonial bidding. In southeastern Nigeria, especially among the Igbo, this was a problem. The Igbo had no centralized kings or hierarchies. Power was shared, often collectively and crucially, with the Mimincha Shetu playing vital political and economic roles. But the British didn't understand this. They replaced traditional councils with male-only warrant chiefs. Women were pushed aside, silenced, and when the British imposed taxes on men in the 1920s, life for the average Nigerian farmer became even harder. Then came the rumor they were going to tax the women too, and that changed everything. In November 1929, in the small town of Oloko, a census official named Okugo asked a widow named Nwanyeruwa how many goats, people, and property she had. He was preparing for taxation. But to Nwanyeruwa, this wasn't just a question, it was a threat. Women had never been taxed, and she, like many, had already seen her community stripped of power and dignity. An argument broke out. Voices rose. She left the scene and sounded the alarm, and the women responded. Thousands of them. From town to town, market to market, they came together in a movement they called Ogu Umunwanyi, the Women's War. This wasn't a riot, it was strategy. These women organized themselves with military precision. They used a traditional protest method called sitting on a man. It wasn't violent, but it was powerful. They would surround a chief's home or a colonial office. They sang, they danced, they chanted in unison. They exposed corruption, mocked colonial policies. Sometimes they stripped naked, a powerful cultural symbol of protest and shame. And most of all, they demanded answers. Why were they being taxed? Why were their leaders chosen by outsiders? Why were women being silenced? From Oloko to Aba, Umuahia, and beyond, the protests spread like wildfire. Over 10,000 women took part in mass demonstrations. Markets shut down. Colonial buildings were occupied. Warrant chiefs were forced to resign. The colonial system had never seen anything like it, and it was scared. The British response was brutal. They labeled the protests as riots. They sent in troops. In several towns, peaceful protests turned violent when colonial forces opened fire. At least 50 women, Mandi, were killed. Many more were injured. Yet the protests didn't stop. Even in mourning, the women kept pushing. They weren't just fighting taxation. They were fighting for recognition, for justice, for autonomy. In the eyes of these women, the colonial system had stolen their voice, and now they were reclaiming it. Section 5, the aftermath, 11 to 13. The Women's War eventually forced the British to pause. Taxation plans were abandoned. Warrant chiefs were investigated. A commission of inquiry was set up to study what had gone wrong. But perhaps most importantly, the uprising exposed the deep flaws of indirect rule. It showed that Igbo women, long dismissed by colonial administrators, were powerful agents of change. Their voices could not be silenced. After the war, colonial authorities made reforms, slow and partial, but real. Women were included in village councils. Traditional roles were re-evaluated. And across Nigeria, the story of the women who rose up began to spread. They became symbols, legends, seeds of future resistance. History often forgets women, especially black women, especially African women. But the Aba Women's War is a reminder that resistance doesn't always come with guns. Sometimes it comes with songs, with chants, with thousands of feet marching in unison. It comes from markets, from kitchens, from fields, from women, farmers, traders, mothers who refuse to be silent. In 1929, the British saw them as rioters, but history remembers them differently, as warriors of justice, as defenders of tradition, as the women who declared war for more untold stories like this. Follow ObscuraTime.